Welcome back to Concordia, my mostly scratch-built layout loosely set in 1940s New England. It's based on the model railroading classic book H.O. Railroad That Grows, except I'm building it in N gauge. Having completed the Concordia firehouse, and because it's too cold yet to go into my garage to build a cabinet that's going to house my power supply for lighting up my layout, I decided to turn my attention to the train station. Like all of my scratch-built buildings so far, the station's going to be based on a real location. This time, though, it's going to be one that I know really well. The Erie train station in Waldwick, New Jersey, is one I grew up around in the 1970s. Along with its interlocking tower, I used to visit both of these buildings often growing up. Not as a railroad fan, but because they were boarded up buildings and they were forbidden places to go. Apparently both had been in use up to the 1960s, but fell into disuse and disrepair in the 1970s, though they've since been restored to their former glory by the local community organization because of their architectural significance. Both the station and the tower, which I'm eventually going to build too when I actually install turnouts on my layout, are exceptional examples of Queen Anne styling that extend back to 1887 when they were built for the New York, Lake Erie, and Western Railroad. Waldwick itself was an important yard from the 1890s to the 1960s, and at its height, the town that grew up around it was a railroad town, and about half the families worked on the railroad. The station was eventually transferred to the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, the Erie Railroad, the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad, and then on to Conrail and New Jersey Transit. During its time of service, the station served as a railroad depot, telegraph office, post office, railway express office, and a ticket office. But as Waldwick's significance to the railroads waned, so did maintenance of the station and tower, and by the 2000s, they were in serious danger of being lost to rot and decay. The local historical society charged New Jersey Transit with demolition by neglect, but finally convinced the railroad to transfer control of it to the organization, and a years-long fundraising effort resulted in both their preservation and their inclusion on the state and federal historical registers. The Erie interlocking tower, though, actually gets most of the attention from historians and rail fans, and there was even an HO scale model made of it. As an aside, I was curious about what the WC meant that's featured on the tower and appears in historical photographs too, but I couldn't find anything about it. A lot of the historical writings also refer to the WC tower, but not to what WC means. Turns out it's actually pretty simple. All interlocking towers are assigned letter codes, mostly based on the town they're located in. So WC just means Waldwick. Today, the Waldwick station serves as a museum to Waldwick's railroad history, and while it's not a New England station, because of its style and the fact that I grew up with the station and interlocking tower always in the background, I'll be adding them to my layout. As always, I'm starting my build in the free online software program called Inkscape. I was fortunate to find a quick architectural sketch of the station from around 1909, which gives the dimensions of each of the three main rooms of the building: the ticket office, the waiting room, and what looks like it says toilets. As they're separated into two distinct rooms, it would seem one would be for men and the other women, but did public accommodations actually have such distinctions back then? I used those dimensions for my design though, and interestingly, I subsequently found a floor plan for the station that was included in the application for its inclusion on the historical register. In those drawings, the toilets are actually listed as a single coal room. The station does have a preserved cast iron potbelly stove that was used at the station, so maybe it was fed by the coal. I also found a photo from the rebuilding of the station that appears to show the room with chunks of coal on the floor. So it may be that the toilets were eventually scrapped in favor of the coal room. I noticed there is a latticework screen on the wall of that room on the restored building rather than windows, so that would seem to allow for airflow in the building. And I just figured the restoration adopted the coal room rather than the restroom design. However, I also found some early 1900 photos showing construction on the building, and they also show the screen in place. So perhaps the original plan for toilets was scrapped in favor of the cold room. I wondered how best to build the structure because the 3 separate rooms are all distinct from one another, and the ticket office actually runs at a different angle from the waiting room. So I ultimately decided to make it 3 separate structures that'll be glued together. The toilet/coal room will be further joined by a single outer wall that runs the entire length of the building. And the ticket office, well, basically it's going to have 3/4 of its one wall attached to the waiting room. So I think it's going to work out okay. Now, as many of you might know from my other videos, I've developed the design process from watching Michael Scott's videos on his Chanwell channel. But there's one thing I definitely do different than he does. In designing the final building, he uses different colored guides to represent the various layers of walls that he will build. But for some reason, when I go to do the same thing, I just can't wrap my head around how they are all related to one another. So I use a floor plan on which I mark the different layers. It just makes it easier for me to visualize how all the pieces go together. Also, up to now, I've followed Michael's lead and hand cut all my pieces. But after getting an Amazon gift card recently and seeing a few other channels use one, I just ordered myself a Cricut machine. I'm getting the Explore 3. The tipping point for me was watching a recent video from Deanstown Model Railway, and he mentions using a Cricut to cut out the windows for the building he's constructing. Although Michael's sticky label method of making windows has worked great, I've never been 100% happy with how my windows have turned out. And after going down the YouTube rabbit hole of other model railroaders using Cricuts for various projects, I was convinced to give it a try, and hopefully it improves my builds a little bit further. So right now I'm at the stage of creating my paper mock-up, and after printing it out, I don't think it looks too bad. It all seems in proportion and there's no obvious gaps or errors, but that's still to come. I keep choosing these buildings with these funky roof designs, like the one on my firehouse. And again, Michael's no maths process has helped me in the past, but I just wish I would pick a building design with a simple gabled roof. In the next part of this build series, part 2, I'm going to construct the cardboard mock-up just to make sure everything still fits properly and incorporate any design changes I might still make. And then I'll go on to the final construction. So thanks for visiting Concordia as I'm slowly and steadily scratch building my layout. And if you like videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Okay, thanks for watching.